Good morning. This is the third of our What For series, and I'd like to read a couple of passages from our ancient scriptures this morning. The first is from Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 2 to 9, and then I'll be reading from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 to 6, both from the Contemporary English Version. So Mark 9. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him. They went up to a high mountain where they could be alone. There, in front of the disciples, Jesus was completely changed, and his clothes became much whiter than any bleach on earth could make them. Then Moses and Elijah were there talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Teacher, it's good for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But Peter and the others were terribly frightened, and he did not know what he was talking about. The shadow of a cloud passed over and covered them. From the cloud, a voice said, "This is my son, and I love him. Listen to what he says." At once the disciples looked around, and they saw only Jesus. As Jesus and his disciples were coming down the mountain, he told them not to say a word about what they had seen until the Son of Man had been raised from death. And then from 2 Corinthians chapter 4. If there is anything hidden about our message, it is hidden only to someone who's lost. The God who rules this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers. They cannot see the light, which is a good news, because our glorious Christ, who knows what Christ is like. We are not preaching about ourselves. Our message is that Jesus Christ is Lord. He also sent us to be your servants. The scriptures say God commanded light to shine in the dark. Now God is shining in our hearts to let you know that his glory is seen in Jesus Christ. May our spirits be blessed by these words from our ancient scriptures. 2 weeks ago, we looked at how concerned the people of Corinth were about whether they should eat meat offered to idols if they were followers of Jesus. We heard how Paul said that we were free to eat whatever we wanted, but that he would rather be a vegetarian who hurt a sensitive soul. We thought about how this question is not just about food choices, but rather about individualism versus community health. When we lose track of what is good for the community, we start to lose track of our reason for being. If life is only about individual pleasures, when those pleasures lose their gleam, no wonder so many of us these days are asking the question, what for? Last week, we looked at how big the universe is, how vast the star systems, and how unimaginably long it's been since the beginning of time, 13.7 billion years, and maybe more. We wondered, along with modern astronomers, at what might have set off the Big Bang, and talked about how everything that exists is made of the one and same energy. I told you, too, that if there was no one watching before time began, Creator, the source of all, was not only indescribable, but unknowable. I mentioned the idea that within the heart of the original energy source, within the heart of what we call God, there was a longing, an ache, perhaps even an anguish at not being seen and known, that perhaps the universe came into being because of a universal what for. Perhaps just as we reach into the vastness of space for some kind of connection with all that is, we can think of the all that is reaching out to us, to all of creation, to all of the universe, longing to be known and loved. There is a verse in the Gospel of John, the very first words of that very enigmatic ancient story, that says, "In The beginning was the Word. In light of our question, what for, I can hear a word echoing through the emptiness of space, and that word perhaps might have been, hello? Anybody there? That verse, John 1 verse 1 goes on to say that the Word was with God and the Word was God. A word is a meaningful group of letters, squiggles on paper, but it can also be a group of words, a sentence, or a story. Let me have a word with you is quite different than a simple hello. Sentences, proper sentences, have a beginning and an end, a subject and an object. So we could say, in the beginning was the sentence, a fully formed sentence with a beginning and an end, and this sentence was God. God became both the subject and the object, both the observer and the observed. That sentence, that energy that was the source of all, spoke itself into the emptiness of space. Let there be light. When I was a child, my mother helped me to make a spinner. I colored the sections of that circle of cardboard with my crayons, red, blue, and yellow, and maybe purple, green, and orange too. Then Mom punched 2 holes in the spinner in the center of the disc for a loop of string. She showed me how I could make that circle spin so fast that all the colors disappeared and only white remained. That's when I learned that colors are part of one white light, all the colors. The unknowable and unseen source of all, according to Genesis, was like a thick, dense darkness, moving as wind, as breath through the emptiness of space. One by one, the structures of the universe and of our world were spoken into existence. And the source of all saw everything that was made, and behold, it was very good. Can you imagine? Can you feel the delight? Can you experience the joy, the fun, the pleasure of turning invisible energy into particles and into worlds and trees and frogs and birds and stars? What an unexpected pleasure. Creator delighting in creation. The longing of the heart of source of all had sprung up into joy. Every one of us knows that when something is enjoyable, it's even more enjoyable when we can experience it with someone else. I went to the art gallery a couple of weeks ago with my friend Debbie. I took such delight in one of the newest installations there, more than one actually, that I wanted to go again, but not alone. I wanted to go with someone else. So last week I took my friends Natalie and Anne-Marie with me. There was this one new thing there that I don't even know how to describe with words. It's like music that isn't music. It's like art that isn't art. It's a cacophony of amazement. And it's best when it's shared, and especially when shared with friends. If you want to go, just tell me and I will go too. Victoria Lours, in her book, Church of the Wild, wrote that up until the 4th century, the word logos was translated as conversation. In the beginning was the conversation, and the conversation was with God, and the conversation was God. We experience ourselves and our own pleasure by seeing it mirrored back to us from someone else. Each of us longs for someone to experience life's pleasures with us. We want a connection with someone outside of ourselves, someone to see us, someone to know us, someone to laugh and converse with us. That was the longing, the desire, the anguish even in the heart of the Creator. That was the what for that ignited the Big Bang. Everything was good, but it was not good to be alone. That is the answer to the question, what for? The answer is togetherness. Togetherness with each other and with all that is. In the story of beginnings as told in the creation story in the Hebrew book of Genesis, the Creator said, I'll make humans in our image. I'll make humans to be like us after our likeness. Like a photo or a mirror reflects our faces that we would not be able to see otherwise. Creator became knowable through creation. But last week I told you how any metaphor that we might use represents only an aspect, a tiny aspect of the source of all. I told you that any word used to describe the unknowable can only hold a part of all that is. When I stop spinning my spinner, I can see the different colors. When those colors are spun together, we see white light. Perhaps if somehow we could put all that exists back together, and if somehow we could spin the universe fast enough, we might be able to catch a glimpse of the brightness of the Creator. We can't do that. And even if we could, the light would be too bright. Did you know that this spring, on April the 8th, there will be a total solar eclipse passing directly over us here in New Brunswick? Do you have your eclipse glasses yet? In a solar eclipse, as the moon passes between the earth and the sun, we are sorely tempted to look up. But even with only a part of the sun shining through, part of the sun showing, that light is bright enough to blind us. The light of the sun is approximately 1.4 times 10 to the 25th light bulbs, 100-watt light bulbs. That's 14 followed by 25 zeros, or 24 zeros, sorry. We can't experience the marvelous, dreadful light directly without harm, but we can experience it in smaller bits, like looking through a filter at the sun, or a sunbeam coming through a pinhole in a blind in the window, or one light bulb at a time. We can get some understanding and experience of the whole by looking at the part. In Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, he wrote about how Moses spent such close time with God that Moses' face shone with the brightness of the Creator. Moses was a very good mirror, but the brightness of his face scared people so much that they had to look away. They wanted to look away. They asked Moses to cover his face, to put on a veil. Even the reflected light of sacred presence was too much. They could not allow themselves to experience or to comprehend that light. They blinded themselves. As Paul wrote in our scripture passage this morning, there was nothing hidden except to the blind. Knowing God was as simple as allowing ourselves to see what God made. Even better, Paul said, was the good news that the glorious Christ shows us what God is like. God is shining in our hearts to let us know that his glory is seen in Jesus Christ. Today is the day we call Transfiguration Sunday, the day we remember how Jesus took 3 of his good friends up a mountain for a private retreat. Something was different up there on that mountain. They got to see Jesus differently. He became so bright that his clothes were whiter than any bleach known on earth could make them. And he seemed to be having a conversation with Moses and Elijah. On Transfiguration Sunday, we usually think about why Moses and Elijah were part of that scenario. Was it so we could compare the teachings of Jesus to the teachings of the law and the teaching of the prophets? Was it to link Jesus with these two men whose bodies, after they died, were never found? A foreboding, or a foreshadowing, I should say, of the resurrection? Today, I'd like to think of Jesus taking his three closest friends up the mountain to give them a better understanding of who he was, who he really was. Just prior to the trek up that mountain, Jesus had been trying to tell them that things weren't as they appeared, that despite how much people seemed to love him, soon he would be killed. Jesus tried and tried to get this point across to his friends, but Peter took him aside and said in private, "Jesus, for heaven's sakes, don't talk like that." But Jesus replied, "Get away from me. You're just like the rest of them. You should be thinking not like everybody else. I need you to think like God thinks. I want you to think from God's perspective. I need you to know me from a broader view. I want you to really know me. Really know me." Jesus wanted them to see that who he was in his power was bigger than his physical human body. He had come humbly into that human body, but he was so much more. On the mountaintop, he opened up his energy into brilliant light. And there, in that brilliant light, Peter, James, and John could see into a world beyond this world, where Jesus could talk with people who had lived centuries before. Not only did Moses represent the law and Elijah represent the prophets, but their presence on the mountain, on that mountaintop, represented the world of energy, perhaps. The existence of something beyond what we can see and understand with our physical eyes. This was the reality of who Jesus was. He was the light of creation in human form, like a slowed down spinner, slowed down enough to let us see the colors that make up the light. Jesus wanted to be known and loved in all of his being, but like the humans that they were, his friends could not comprehend. So Jesus said not to tell anyone. The day would come when it would all start to make sense. Jesus wanted them to know the reason for their existence. He wanted them to experience knowing their Creator intimately, like friends do, good friends. He wanted to be his whole self with them. And Creator, the source of all, is still reaching out to us in and through creation. Creator is still longing to be known and loved. Our reason for being is to see Creator in all of creation, to love each other and to love our world with the passion of the energy that became the Big Bang, the passion that birthed all that is. What for? Why does this all exist? Why do you and I exist? To know each other, to love, and to be loved. Have a good week.